Society has told distortions and lies about our lives for so long, and they have repeated them with such energy and fervor that sometimes even we believe the lies. We have, as Valletta said, 100 years of work to do to correct all of those distortions and lies. And we do it for the young gay sisters and brothers so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel but can build on momentum. And we are determined to archive this information so that gay pride is not just a word, but actually a resource they can use. They can go to the computer and find the actual documents that shows the organization and shows the philosophies and shows the plan. And that's what we do. And the next lady is involved very deeply in that. She's the executive assistant Dallas city attorney, serving as appellate coordinator. Her practice focuses on appellate law, prosecuting and defending appeals, as well as advising and consulting with other city attorneys on litigation issues with appellate ramifications. She's appointed by the late and great Governor Ann Richards as a just... I love that you cannot say Ann Richards' name in this state today still without, you have to stop. I love that we have to, and she deserves it. But going back, our guest was appointed by the late Governor Ann Richards as a justice on the Dallas Court of Appeals, and she fought and defeated Judge Jack Hampton. I love that you cannot say Jack Hampton's name in this state now without boos breaking out, and not the good kind of boos. She was a justice on the Dallas Court of Appeals and fought and defeated Judge Jack Hampton and retained the office. A breast cancer survivor and Democratic Party activist, she is a member of the board of directors of the Dallas Way. Please welcome our friend, Judge Barbara Rosenberg.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Rosenberg, and my story is not a personal story of gay activism, but it is a story of gay activism. My story is a glimpse at the '92 Justice Rosenberg campaign for the Dallas Court of Appeals. But first, let me give you a little background. I was born in Galveston and raised in Texas City. It's a small town on the Gulf Coast. Having grown up there, I came up with two goals in life. One, get out of Texas City. Two, get a car. I got out and went to the University of Texas at Austin. I thought at that time you should study the hardest subject you could think of, and so I chose math. I did get my BA, but barely. After a short time as a teacher and getting my car, I went to law school. Now I'd found a course of study for which I could excel. I graduated fourth in my class, but when I got out, I found that it was very difficult to get a job. I couldn't even get an interview with law firms or a clerkship with the court. At that time, there were not many women lawyers in any of the big law firms, and no woman had clerked for the Texas Supreme Court. That experience got me active in women's issues and politics. I wanted to make it easier for those that followed. I was helped along the way by my law school classmate, Don Mason, the only person I knew when I moved to Dallas. He introduced me to the Democratic Party activists and leadership and the person who gave me my first job. My first break into the judiciary came from working in a municipal campaign. My candidate won, and he thought I should be a judge. He came and said, "Would you like to be a judge?" I said yes. My friends thought, "You're never going to get this. You're only a year out of law school." Well, I was appointed, and that started my judicial career. I worked in the municipal court and various law offices for the next 7 years. During that period, I was on the legal team defending those arrested at the village station raids. I taught the then gay political caucus members the rules of participating in the Democratic convention process, and I was vice chair of the Dallas Women's Political Caucus. My next step in the judiciary was an appointment as an associate judge in the 330th District Court, a family court judge. While in the family court, I worked in many campaigns. I was a delegate to 2 Democratic National Conventions. I was president of the Women Law and Law section of the state bar, and we implemented a bias in the court study. And I thought about running for office during that period of time, but I was told I couldn't win with a name like Rosenberg. The only Jews that had won office in this county had the last names of Frost and Moss. But I sat back and I watched Ann Richards win office. And I had been hearing divorces for 7 years, and I thought, you know, I'm willing to take a chance even if that means running in a Republican district. After Ann Richards appointed me, I applied for a vacancy, and she appointed me. Harriet Earhart stepped up and did me the great favor of running my campaign. Mary Gilmore became the campaign administrator, and Deb Floyd designed and took care of the database. Charlotte Taft came and was giving me advice. She immediately advised me that I would have to tell people why I wanted to be judge. She knew I was very reserved, but she said I would have to express my feelings during the campaign. Additionally, the district covered 7 counties, and my staff was worried about a Jewish woman running in rural counties. I was not as worried as they were. I grew up in Texas City. There weren't many Jews there. But they made sure I was prepared. They enlisted Susan Caudell, and she videotaped me, and she asked all kinds of questions so I could answer questions about religion and myself. But nothing could quite prepare me for what came next. Jack Hampton was my opponent. All of a sudden, this campaign was high profile. You might ask, why running against Jack Hampton was such a big deal? Let me tell you. In 1988, Judge Jack Hampton commented on a criminal case that he had heard against Richard Lee Bednarski, who was tried for the murders of Tommy Lee Trimble and John Lloyd Griffin, 2 gay men. He was interviewed about the relatively light sentence that he had given Bednarski, and in response to the questions he stated, 1, these 2 gays wouldn't have gotten killed if they hadn't been cruising the streets and picking up teenage boys. 2, I don't care much for queers cruising the streets, picking up teenage boys. I have a teenage boy. 3, some murder victims are less innocent in their deaths than others. In those cases, a defendant is unlikely to deserve a maximum sentence. 4, I put prostitutes and gays at about the same level. If these boys had picked up 2 prostitutes and taken them into the woods and killed them, I'd consider that a similar case, and I'd be hard put to give somebody life for killing a prostitute. He then told the paper to spell his name right. He stated that if this decision makes anybody mad, they'll forget before the next election. If it wasn't enough to give this I don't know that that helped anybody. If it wasn't enough to give the Times to the interview to the Times Herald, he repeated his statements in a telephone interview given to the Associated Press. Let's see.
The victims were homosexuals. They were out in the homosexual area picking up teenage boys. Had they not been out there trying to spread AIDS around, they'd still be alive today. Oh, definitely.
He said, after he gave that interview, that he didn't care what the Gay Alliance thought. No surprise, the LGBT community and allies decided to take a stand against this type of bias in the judiciary. Oak Lawn religious leaders urged Hampton to retract his statements. 1,800 complaints were filed with the Commission on Judicial Conduct, the most ever. 13 attorneys, some of whom had cases in his court, filed a petition for his removal. Don Mason, Bill Nelson, the lawyer, Jerry Birdwell, and Jim Barber were among those signing. Also, lawyers representing the J.L. Turner, the African American Attorney Association, the American Jewish Congress, and North Texas Legal Services signed. The Gay Alliance led a 500-person protest. At the protest, statements were read from then Treasurer Ann Richards and U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy. Hampton's words made national news. Even a New York Times editorial disapproved of Hampton's comments. As a result, the State Commission on Judicial Conduct denounced the public comments made by Hampton, holding that the comments were destructive to public trust and confidence in the judiciary. A public censure was issued. However, he could remain on the bench, and he was running against me. Would people remember? The press did. The press was calling from day one. Now, our first plan was very practical. We were going to try to put him off the ballot for having filed defective petitions. We knew, and I thought, it would be easier to win if I didn't have an opponent. But the courts allowed him to stay on the ballot with his defective petitions. At this point, though, I really thought that running against a biased judge would not be all that hard. Who would want a censured judge? Early on in the campaign, I got a lesson. I won a vote of attorneys in a bar poll, but it was only by 200 votes out of 3,000 cast. The Committee for a Qualified Judiciary, that's run by attorneys and business leaders, did not endorse either of us. Those that had supported Hampton would not vote for me unless Hampton got an endorsement too. I lost the endorsement by 1 vote. I guess Hampton also thought I would be easy to beat. Republicans had been winning the seats on the Court of Appeals. A friend did a little undercover work to see what his campaign was saying and doing. His campaign was describing me as a New York Jewish lesbian. His literature stated that he was a native Texas with Texas values. Imagine his surprise at our first joint appearance when he learned I was a native Texan after all. But native Texan or not, I needed 400,000 votes to win the election. The polling of independents showed that if no one knew us, it was just name, I got 28% of the vote and he got 25%. When people got information about each of us, I got 61% of the vote. I needed to remind people who Hampton was and get a message of fairness to as many as possible, and getting on TV was the answer. We needed to raise enough money, $200,000, to get on TV. Now, Charlotte didn't have to worry because with Hampton, it was easy to communicate my feelings about the race and the judiciary and why I wanted on the court. I would say, a judge has a special charge given in the Code of Judicial Conduct that states, a judge shall perform judicial duties without prejudice or bias. In my opinion, there is no place for prejudice and bias in this world, but prejudice and bias must be kept out of the courtroom. That is the pledge that I give to you. Now I needed some place to say it. And Harriet and Mary sent me to every women's club, every political organization, every precinct, just anywhere anybody would listen. I went to places where there were only 2 voters. I went after every endorsement, and of the ones I went after, I got, except for that committee. It was always exciting when a new volunteer walked in and proposed a new group to meet. Carl Parker walked into the campaign office, and that was Harriet's home, and made a proposal that was campaign changing. He suggested a series of fundraisers given by black tie dinner table captains. I do not have a count on how many homes I went to, but I had 99 home fundraisers that year, and I'm sure he's responsible for most of them. And I think that George Harris and Jack Evans attended every one. And I know they had memorized my stump speech. At one of those parties, it was at the home of Mike Hutchison, the senator's nephew, sponsored by Lee Taft and Mike Anglin. I met Mike's mother, I'm going to call her Mrs. H, a prominent Republican and president of a Republican women's club. After hearing my campaign pitch, she invited me to do the same at her home in Bent Tree. I was a little nervous, but I was in. I would go into the heart of Republican country. I arrived, and there were about 15 couples. As I came in, all the women kind of gathered around me and were asking questions. You know, I didn't want to tell too much because then I wouldn't have anything for my speech. And so as I gave them a little information, I said, I was appointed by Ann Richards. They looked shocked, gasped, stepped back, and they went, she's a Democrat. Mrs. H had not told them. They all stayed to hear my talk, and they took yard signs. That night I made a few more friends. I thought to myself, we're right, most people want an unbiased judge. Now, Mrs. H was severely criticized by other Republicans for taking a stand and for supporting me, but people like her make a difference in this world. At my bank, a teller recognized me and said she was a Republican. She told me all her Republican friends were going to be voting for me. They couldn't have Hampton on the bench. I was feeling good. I didn't want to make any mistakes. I think in trying to be perfect in this campaign, I had a few minor breakdowns. My staff booked me for a live interview on a gay news program. It was KYRO on local access cable. Pat Gamble drove me there. When I arrived, I was greeted by on-screen commentators in drag. Even Pat's eyebrows raised. I panicked. I was much too serious for something like this. I called my staff. I'm sure I was a little bit hysterical. But they calmed me down, and I waited. And as I waited, there was a taped interview of Senator Paul Tsongas that was shown. There was a news segment that was called About Town that was done by a drag queen, but she didn't interview me. The interview went well, and I still have the tape of that program, and I'm donating that to the Dallas Way. A highlight of the campaign was meeting Stephen Piles in an event at Kay Wilkerson's home. He was not political, but for me, he gave a small dinner for my large donors at the Ruth Street Cafe. It was a 6-course dinner with 6 matching wines. Everybody was impressed. In running for judicial office, there are many forums. And in most of the forums, judges don't debate. They just give their credentials and the reasons that they're running. But through the campaign, I did learn a little bit about credentials at the Van Zandt County Farm Bureau's Chili Supper and Candidate Night. Now, the MC was an Aggie. And every time somebody got up to speak as he was going down ballot, he'd make friends and make fun of everybody that had gone to UT. So I had to think. After my intro, I had figured it out. I stated that I had learned a little bit about qualifications having listened to the MC, and that I wanted everybody to know that my father had graduated from Texas A&M, and so had my brother. There was a roar of laughter, and I did win Van Zandt County. Because of the high profile of the race, there were many additional forums where people were able to ask questions. Whenever we went, you could tell the difference between the two of us. You either liked him or me. There was no one that would like both of us. For example, when he was asked why he wanted or why he became a judge, he said it was because he wanted a steady paycheck. I said I was interested in justice. I was never publicly asked about my religion. The only time I was asked if I was Jewish was in private by other Jews. During that year, it was reported that Hampton remarked during one trial that he was glad he had an all-white jury, and in another he made jokes about the disabled. But through the whole campaign, he was only asked about his biases once. It was at a forum at the Jewish Community Center, and 36 candidates had been invited to speak. There, an audience member asked Hampton and me the following question: do you think homosexuals should be treated differently from other people in the court? I answered first: everyone is equal when it comes to the law. Hampton refused to answer. No comment, as some members in the audience giggled. Hampton became red-faced and angry and then stormed off the podium. It was October 8th. The time was right for the TV ads. They went up early during early voting, and the ads reminded people of his censure and offered the alternative. There was also a Democratic Party ad where all 4 of us that were running for the Court of Appeals appeared together with Ann Richards speaking for us. From January 1 to October 31st, I raised over $150,000, the second most in the state for that office, from over 1,000 contributors. That, along with hundreds of phone calls for contributions, 400 appearances, including 25 law firms, the 99 fundraisers. I appeared in 4 parades, 2 radio shows, and several news programs. I had 275 volunteers who made phone calls, helped with mailings, distributed thousands of yard signs in 7 counties and to all the polling places. This did not even include what the LGPC did on its own or other endorsing organizations. It was a movement. The campaign was exhausting. I gave my 100%, and so did everybody else. And on election night, we got 409,975 votes, and I won by 15,000 votes. A close win, but it was a win. The result even made the New York Times, crediting the LGBT community and women for the win. Now, I've been around the room a little bit, and I know that some of you were around in 1992. So I want anyone who contributed money, had a bumper sticker, yard sign, volunteer, voted for me, please stand. Stand up. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I also know that there are people here that were around with the petitions for Hampton and who protested what he said in 1988. And if you folks will please stand, those that protested, sign those petitions. You made a difference. Thank you. From the campaign, I learned people would put a Rosenberg bumper sticker on their car. I had my doubts. I learned that a majority of people want a fair, unbiased judiciary and would cross party lines to achieve it. I learned how much a difference you make when you stand up for your own rights. Even an event that takes place in 1988 can make a difference and be remembered in 1992. The LGBT community made a significant difference between winning and losing that race when it stood up to Jack Hampton in 1988 and said no. And what remains true is that what we do now makes a difference in the future we will have. Ann Richards was campaigning for the 1992 candidates in the outlying counties of the district on her way to participate in a dove hunt. She was making 5 stops that afternoon, and all us down ballot people wanted because she'd introduce us and we could wave. And so that got us some attention. Our last stop was in Canton, and it was 9 p.m. We were late. The square was full of people. The band was playing. And Ann Richards then steps up to the podium, and all the young girls kind of stand around, just looking up at her. As she looked across the crowd, she began to tell a different story than what she had told at all the other stops. She said that as a young woman, she didn't get to shoot the gun at the dove hunt, that her husband shot the doves, and she sat in the blind, and they gave her the doves so that she could clean them. And then she began to talk about taking the knife and opening up the dove, and then she just got to sticking her hand, and all the girls went, "Ooh!" and it sound just echoed through the square. Ann Richards stopped, looked down at them, and quipped, "If you can't get your hands in the ooh, you can't be governor." So let's keep our hands in the ooh and make sure that we have our rights. Thank you.